The old mansion was quiet under the fading light of dusk, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and filled the halls with an eerie weight. Miriam had worked here for years. Her hands knew every corner of this house, every worn step of the staircase, every flicker of the lights that never seemed to stay steady yet. Tonight something was different. As she stood in the kitchen washing the last dish from dinner, she heard a faint, muffled cry. At first she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. The house had a way of doing that. Whispering through the walls, echoing footsteps that never were. But this was no echo. It was the sound of a baby crying, sharp and piercing, cutting through the stillness. Her heart skipped. She froze, her wet hand still gripping the dish. Her eyes darting toward the ceiling upstairs. The sound grew louder, the high-pitched wail rising in desperation. Miriam dropped the plate into the sink water splashing across her apron and hurried to the stairs, her shoes tapping against the polished wood, each step echoing as if warning her to turn back. There was no baby in the house. She knew that the family she worked for had no infants. The two children were grown away at college. The master and mistress of the house had never mentioned relatives visiting. So why then did the cries sound so real, so close, so painfully human? She clutched the banister and climbed her breath, catching as the sound grew more frantic. The hallway upstairs stretched long and narrow-lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her with every step. The crying came from the farthest room, a room that had been locked for as long as Miriam could remember. She had dusted its door week after week but never stepped inside. No one had she thought the key was lost. Yet tonight the door stood ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling into the hall. Miriam hesitated, her throat tightening, the cry now almost unbearable, as if the child within was gasping for life. Trembling, she pushed the door open and the hinges groaned, the sound loud enough to make her flinch. The room smelled of mildew and something heavier, metallic, a scent that clung to the back of her throat. A single candle flickered on a cracked dresser, casting shadows against peeling wallpaper. Her eyes fell to the crib in the center of the room, an old wooden crib, its paint chipped and faded. She stepped closer, her breath shallow. Inside the crib was not what she expected, not a baby swaddled in blankets, but something small, pale and motionless, a doll. Its porcelain face cracked. One glassy eye, missing the sound of crying, still filled the air, though the doll's lips remained closed. Miriam's hand flew to her mouth. She staggered back, shaking her head. No, this was impossible. Her knees weakened and she reached for the wall to steady herself, her fingers brushing something cold. When she turned, she saw the chains bolted into the floor, heavy, rusted iron with remnants of cloth still tied around them as if someone had once been bound here. The cries grew louder, more anguished, until she pressed her hands to her ears. Yet even then she could still hear it, not from the crib, not from the doll, but from within the very walls of the house, as though the structure itself was weeping. Suddenly the candle flickered and went out. Darkness engulfed the room. Miriam stumbled backward, her back hitting the door frame, her heart racing. She reached for the hallway, desperate to escape. But before she could leave, the sound changed, no longer a baby but a low whisper, her name drawn out slowly as though spoken by someone inches from her ear. Miriam. She spun around but saw nothing, only the outline of the crib in the dim light from the hall, the doll still lying still, its hollow eye socket aimed at her like a dark, unblinking stare. Her breath quickened. She fled, slamming the door behind her, her footsteps pounding down the stairs. She burst into the kitchen, panting, gripping the edge of the counter, her mind reeling. What had she seen? What had she heard? She wanted to tell someone, anyone but who would believe her. The masters were away for the night. She was alone in this vast, echoing house. And then she heard it again, faint but clear, drifting down from upstairs, the unmistakable cry of a baby. Miriam stood frozen in the kitchen, her knuckles white against the counter, her breath shallow. The sound of the baby crying returned again, faint, but echoing through the wooden beams above her head. The sound should have filled her with comfort, the innocence of a child's cry. But instead it chilled her spine like icy water dripping into her bones. She knew she could not ignore it. The house would not let her. She wiped her hands on her apron and forced her feet to move, though each step felt heavier than the last. The staircase stretched before her, dimly lit by the flickering chandelier overhead. She gripped the banister and began to climb, her heart hammering louder than her steps. The portraits along the hallway seemed darker now, faces sterner, the eyes sharper, as if accusing her of trespassing where she did not belong. When she reached the locked room once more, the door was closed, tight, though she had left it ajar before. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob, cold. To the touch, she twisted it, and to her shock it opened without resistance. The air inside was thicker than before. A weight pressing against her chest, the candle that had gone out earlier now burned again faintly, its flame swaying though no breeze moved. The shadows stretched long and grotesque across the cracked walls. The crib remained in the center, the porcelain doll still lying inside, its cracked face gleaming faintly in the glow. Yet the crying did not come from it. Now the sound came from deeper within the room, near the far wall where the chains had been. Miriam stepped closer, her body trembling, her mind screaming at her to flee. But her feet obeyed the pull of the unseen force. There on the wall, she noticed something she had not seen before, a section of wallpaper peeling away, exposing a door smaller, hidden almost like a panel. Her fingers quivered as she tugged at it, the paper tearing easily. She pulled the panel open, and a foul stench wafted out, thick and suffocating. She gagged but forced herself to peer inside. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, stone steps damp with moisture. The cries echoed louder from below, as if the child were trapped in the depths of the earth. She hesitated one last time, but then placed her foot on the step. The wood above creaked as though the house disapproved. Still, she went on down step after step until she reached the bottom. The cellar was unlike anything she had imagined. Dim torches lined the walls, their flames weak but enough to reveal shapes, hanging chains, shackles, and in the far corner a small cradle. Not like the one upstairs, but real, wooden, old and splintered. The cries came from it, sharp, piercing, echoing off the stone walls. Miriam approached slowly, each step heavier than the last, until she stood over the cradle and looked inside. Her breath caught. There was indeed a baby inside. Tiny, pale, its body trembling with each sob, its eyes wide with terror, as if it could see something behind her that she could not. Miriam reached down instinctively, her maternal instinct overwhelming fear. She whispered softly, trying to calm it as her fingers brushed its skin. But the instant she touched it, the baby's cry ceased. Its eyes rolled back and the body crumbled into dust, leaving only a bundle of rotted cloth in her hands. Miriam screamed and dropped the remains, stumbling back, her foot catching on the uneven stone floor. She fell to her knees, sobbing, her mind spinning. What nightmare had she uncovered? But before she could rise, the whispers returned, the same voice that had spoken her name earlier. It surrounded her, filling the cellar, coming from every direction. You should not have come, Miriam. You were not meant to see. She spun around, her eyes wide, searching the shadows. And then she saw them, figures, faint, translucent, drifting just beyond the torchlight. Women, children, men, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted in agony. They were chained to the walls, their bodies emaciated. Their spirits bound, they stared at her with silent accusations. The air grew heavy with their grief and rage. Miriam clutched her chest, tears streaming down her face. She whispered a prayer, but the voices only grew louder, overlapping in anguish until her ears rang. She covered them with her hands, but it did no good. The spirits moved closer, encircling her, the ground beneath her feet trembling. Suddenly, the doll from upstairs appeared in the cradle before her, its cracked face smiling, though its lips had never moved. The missing eye seemed alive now, glowing faintly. The whispers hushed, and one deep voice filled the cellar, booming like thunder. The sins of this house are buried here, Miriam, and now you, too, belong to it. The chains along the walls rattled violently, then shot forward as if alive, wrapping around her wrists, her ankles, her waist. She screamed and fought, pulling against them, but they tightened, digging into her flesh. Dragging her back toward the cradle, she cried out for mercy, for forgiveness, but the house had none. The spirits wailed around her, their voices echoing in unison. The last thing Miriam saw before the darkness closed in was the doll leaning over the cradle, its cracked porcelain smile wide and cruel, the baby's cry returning once more louder than ever, filling her mind as the chains pulled her into blackness. The next morning, when the family returned, the house was silent, the kitchen tidy as though no one had been there yet. Upstairs, the locked room was sealed once again, the crib in the center, the doll lying still, and from somewhere deep within the walls, faintly, so faintly, a baby cried.